The New York Islanders winning streak comes to an end at 7 games. We'll break down the big 7th win and the inevitable end of the streak in Florida. We've got all that, plus the latest injury news coming up on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
Your Locked On Islanders, your daily podcast on the New York Islanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to the Monday edition of the Locked On Islanders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On Islanders your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts so you get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's show is sponsored by FanDuel. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. I am Gil Martin. I have been covering the Islanders for nearly 2 decades, and I also wrote the book Ice Wars on the history of the Islanders-Rangers rivalry. Great to have you aboard today as we discuss the end of the Islanders' 7-game winning streak and the injury updates that go along with it. We have got so much to cover on today's show. First, I want to start with this. The New York Islanders have absolutely nothing to be ashamed of. That 7-game winning streak was outstanding, and even in defeat, considering all the obstacles that this team faced Sunday in Florida, they can hold their heads up high with the effort they gave. And the big question that we're going to talk about is what happens next. We knew the Islanders were not going to win all 30 of their remaining games, okay? So, where do we go from here? And look, the game Sunday in Florida, if I were to describe to you the conditions coming into the game, I think very few people would have said, yeah, I expect the Islanders to win this hockey game. You are on the road on the second game of a back-to-back, facing the defending Stanley Cup champions. You are down to the 4th goalie in your organization. You are without your most dynamic offensive skating forward in Mathew Barzal. Your defense core is missing 3 of its regular 6 players. And, it just got to the point where it was very, very difficult to expect the Islanders to win. And yet, at one point, they actually held a 3-2 lead after falling behind early 2-0. And I give them a lot of credit for scrapping and getting back into the game. They couldn't hold on. I think the exhaustion, coupled with the fact that they are just shorthanded at this point, was just too much to expect them to win this hockey game. And look, let's start with Jakub Skarek. I give him credit. Did he play outstanding? No. Was he terrible? No. The Islanders defensively, there were no soft goals out of the 5 that he gave up. But at the same time, he wasn't lights out spectacular. But so many of those goals were as a result of players not being picked up, guys being in the wrong position. Yes, Skarek did struggle a bit with rebound control, especially early. Too much Carter Verhaeghe. He ended up with a hat trick. But realistically, the reason the Islanders lost was not Jakub Skarek. Congratulations to him for making his long-awaited NHL debut. I wish him well. Will he get another chance to play for the Islanders? Well, that's a whole different story. But realistically speaking, this was his big debut, and it went more or less as expected. He was adequate, not great, not terrible, and the team just did not give him as much support as you expect. When you're playing with a backup goalie or a third string goalie, or actually in this case, the fourth goalie on the organizational depth chart, teams either kind of tighten things up and really play inspired in front of this guy, or they either play the way they usually play or even fall off a little bit. I think the exhaustion and the injuries caused the Islanders to just fall off a little bit. And it just was too much to overcome. Now, that doesn't mean there weren't some highlights from this game against the Panthers. Again, overcoming the early 2-0 deficit. The Islanders didn't even have a shot on goal until the game was 10 and a half minutes old. And yet, Tony DeAngelo with another really good pass to set up a goal by Kyle McLean. Mark Gatcomb getting his second goal in 3 games. Adam Pelech picking up another assist. He has been contributing a lot offensively lately. And the power play even scored a goal. J.G. Pageau cashing in off a nice feed by Casey Cizikas, who has been getting more assists. And, oh, yeah, you insert Dennis Cholowski back into the lineup, he has a pair of assists. So there were some highlights in this game, but overall, not enough juice. And I just think that, given all the circumstances surrounding this game, the writing was more or less on the wall that they were not going to extend the winning streak to 8. Some guys had rough games. Scott Perunovich, -3 in this one. The line of Palmieri, Nelson, and Siplikov were all -2, and they had their struggles. Just overall, defensively, this team did not have what it took. And one thing that I am going to make a minor criticism here, a minor one. You're going up against the Florida Panthers. They are fast. They are big. They are skilled. They are also a physical hockey team. And, I am surprised that Patrick Waugh did not put Matt Martin in instead of Pierre Engvall under the circumstances. I know when you're on a win streak, you don't want to mess around with the lineup, but to me, you already had Mathew Barzal out of the lineup. You put Anthony Duclair back in. So the lineup was changed out of necessity. It had changed. But when you're going up against a big physical opponent, you have to counter with your own physical player. And Matt Martin and Mark Gatcomb, to me, you put them with Kyle McLean, you've got a stronger bunch of guys to counter that physicality. And look, you had 5 hits by Jonah Gadjevich, 4 by AJ Greer, 4 by Nico Mikkola. They came out, Florida, and played the way you expect them to play. They played a physical game, and the Islanders just could not counter. And when you can't counter, it just doesn't work. You know who led the Islanders in hits in this game? Bo Horvat with 4. And all 6 Islanders defensemen in this game, 1 hit. It belonged to Adam Pelech. 5 Islanders defensemen combined for 0 hits in this contest. That's not going to get the job done. And, one of the reasons the Islanders were successful in this winning streak was physicality. And we had a poll up on our YouTube page, and we discussed, why are the Islanders being more successful? And physicality was part of it. Let there be no doubt. Physicality was part of it. But they just didn't have the physicality on Sunday because I think they were tired, because I think they were dealing with too many injuries, and maybe there was just more energy expended trying to protect Jakub Skarek, even though they didn't do a particularly good job of that. But they showed heart. They did come back from the early 2-0 deficit. They did not give up. And the big question is, where do you go from here? And we're going to talk about that coming up in our third segment, because it's an important question as we have 1 week left before the Four Nations break, and we're going to break all of that down. So we'll talk about Saturday's big win over Tampa Bay. We'll talk about the injury situation. And for our Islanders' birthday of the day, a former first-round pick who only lasted 2 seasons on the island 3 seasons rather on the island in the late 90s, but went on to have a really solid career with the Vancouver Canucks, among other teams. Let's see if you can guess who that is. We've got all that and more coming up on today's Locked On Islanders podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here. 1 game, 2 teams, endless possibilities. And there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you could place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, well, that's the icing on the cake. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of Super Bowl 59. Saturday, the Islanders came up big, extended the winning streak to 7 games, beat the Tampa Bay Lightning 3-2 in overtime with Tony DeAngelo, getting the game winner just 33 seconds into the extra session. And again, credit to this team. They had a 2-1 lead. They gave up the tying goal with less than a minute left in the third period, but they still managed to bounce back. And they got some really good goaltending from Ilya Sorokin. He made 28 saves, and they were able to beat Andrei Vasilevsky for that third goal and get the win. This was gut check time. We saw solid play from Simon Holmstrom, who added 2 assists. Kyle Palmieri with a goal. And, Adam Boqvist getting a goal in his Islanders debut. And, we didn't even mention Boqvist, but Lou Lamoriello picking up yet another player who might be able to help this team. And I give credit. I really do give credit to Lou Lamoriello for adding these players. And look, I am not saying that in the long haul, these are guys who are going to be, parts of a dynasty or anything like that. But what it does mean is that the New York Islanders did a good job of adding players who were available and just getting contributions from them on very short notice. So, look, he comes in and ends up being a +2 in his Islanders debut. And he's just, again, fitting in, learning the new system. And, there was even a photo he was wearing Anthony Beauvillier's gloves. So it was all last minute. They added him. But again, just a solid contribution in this game that they managed to win. It really was sort of that next man up mentality. And every NHL team has to deal with injuries over the course of the season. And boy, the Islanders have had more than almost anybody. But all of that notwithstanding, this team has shown heart and moxie, and they were able to come back without Anthony Duclair on Saturday due to an illness, and still go out there and win the game. And, they go into overtime, having given up the game-tying goal in the final minute. Scott Mayfield out of the game early. Mathew Barzal out of the game with about a minute and a half left in regulation. You're down one defenseman for most of the game. You're down your best overtime player because nobody on this Islanders roster skates like Mathew Barzal. And when you're going 3-on-3, you want Barzy out there. And he's not available. And they still found a way to win. I have problems still with the way this team has been constructed, the way that this team, the lack of prospects who are ready to step in, which made adding these players necessary, the way a lot of contracts have been structured, the way no trade clauses have been administered, the way that this team hasn't traded away players who could have gotten them a nice return. All of those factors, I have issues with Lou Lamoriello and the way he's put this team together. But as far as the way Lou Lamoriello has been able to add players on the fly, from whether it's trading away a late draft pick or signing guys who are in the KHL or picking players up off waivers, I give him a lot of credit because he really has come up big in that regard last year and this year. So, I want to give credit where credit is due. I'm going to be a straight shooter. If a guy does something good, I'm going to say so. If I disagree with a plan or a strategy, I'm going to say so. Give credit to Lou for picking up these players, the D'Angelos, the Perunoviches, the Boqvists, the Mike Rileys last year. Got to give Bortuzzo last year. Got to give him credit. And filling in the holes. The holes shouldn't be there. They shouldn't be that bad, but they are. You fill them in, and that's how it goes. So the Islanders' win streak reached 7 games. And it really was important that they go on this run if they want to have any hope, realistically, of making a playoff run. So now that the streak is over, where do the Islanders stand in the wild card hunt? And right now, the Islanders are 3 points out of the wild card spot, but they have a couple of games in hand on Boston, and Tampa has 1 game in hand on the Islanders. Those two teams both have 58 points. Detroit has 57. It is going down to the wire because right now, 7 points separate wild card 1 from 15th in the Eastern Conference. Can the Islanders still make the playoffs? Yeah. Is it likely, even if they continue to play well down the stretch? No, because they're going to probably need to get 65% of the remaining points that are on the table in order to win, and then hope that none of the other teams in this fight are going to do better. It is not going to be easy. You have exactly 30 games left on the schedule. And we'll see. We'll see what happens. But right now, you win 3 in a row, you could be in the playoffs. You lose 3 in a row, you could drop back to 15th in the conference again. There is no margin for error as we head into the final week of play before the Four Nations tournament. And don't forget, we will be here every day during the Four Nations break. We'll keep you up to date on what's happening in the Four Nations, how Brock Nelson is doing. We'll talk about the status of the team. We'll have some guests and some interviews. So make sure you stay with us throughout this very busy time. We've got more to get to on today's show. We'll have the latest on the injury situation. Plus, we'll have our Islanders birthday of the day. All that and more still to come on today's Locked On Islanders podcast. Thank you for making Locked On Islanders your first listen today. For your second listen, find Locked On Fantasy Hockey. Become a fantasy hockey expert and get the edge over your league mates with daily tips from our hosts, Steele and Flip. Find Locked On Fantasy Hockey on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Injuries. We mentioned the two that took place on Saturday. But even before that, we found out Anthony Duclair had an illness. He missed Saturday's game. He was able to return. But we got more injury news on Marcus Hogberg, Semyon Varlamov, and it wasn't good news. Varlamov, we did, everydayers will remember, we talked about Varlamov was skating on his own but wasn't practicing with the team. Well, guess what? He's not skating on his own anymore. He suffered an apparent setback. He is out indefinitely right now, and that isn't positive. Marcus Hogberg, the update was he's likely to miss 4 weeks right now. You do have a 10-day gap for the Four Nations tournament. So now the question is this. What do you do about the goaltending situation? Because you have 3 games left this week before the break for Four Nations. 3 games, including a back-to-back coming up this weekend. So Tuesday, you've got Vegas. Friday, Winnipeg. Saturday, Minnesota. Not only is that a back-to-back, it is a back-to-back with on the road crossing an international boundary. Do you want to play Ilya Sorokin in all 3 of those games? You have 3 choices. You could either play Sorokin in all 3. You could come back with Skarek in either the Winnipeg or the Minnesota game, or Lou Lamoriello, if he thinks there's somebody out there, whether it's a trade, whether it's waivers, whether it's someone from the KHL, a free agent, wherever you could find another goalie who you think could be an upgrade over Jakub Skarek, those are your 3 options. Skarek plays 1, Sorokin plays 3, or, go to plan C and bring in the 5th goalie to start a game for the New York Islanders this year. I think, considering that there are 10 days off after this weekend, you can actually let Sorokin play all 3 games. Not that Skarek was awful, but he is not ready for the NHL on a big-time consistent basis. He didn't show me enough against the Panthers to say that he's ready to go. And we'll see what Patrick Roy decides to do. But I think they should just go with Sorokin, and then he's got 10 days off. Usually, overall, I don't want Sorokin overworked. We saw what happened last year. Everydayers will remember how he struggled, couldn't even really play the last 8, 9, 10 games of the season because he was just worn out. Now, maybe the back injury also had something to do with it, but maybe the back injury was also caused by being worn down. We'll see. We'll see. I think you can get away with it now because of the timing of it being right before Four Nations. Now, as for Mathew Barzal and Scott Mayfield, Patrick Roy only announced before Sunday's game that they would not be playing on Sunday. And he hoped there would be an update Monday, today, concerning how they're doing and how long they may be out. We know the Islanders. Everydayers, I've talked about this. This team doesn't give a lot of information, and they're not obligated to under NHL rules. But hopefully, Monday, late morning, early afternoon, we'll have some kind of an update on how long these two players are going to miss, if anything. And again, you have 3 games left before Four Nations. Scott Mayfield isn't playing in Four Nations. Mathew Barzal is not playing in Four Nations. But you have no margin for error. If these guys can play without risking significant further injury, you want them out there. Because if you lose, this is a tough schedule. You're playing Vegas, Minnesota, and Winnipeg. 3 teams that would be in the playoffs right now, with Winnipeg having, one of the best, if not the best teams in the league. Vegas being one of the best teams in the league. Minnesota, even though they're dealing with some injuries, a really good team. It's hard enough to win these games if you're healthy. Got to get at least 3 points in these 3 games. And if Mathew Barzal can go, if Scott Mayfield can go, it would go a long way toward getting some points in these games. Can't afford. The one thing this Islander team cannot afford is to follow up a 7-game winning streak with a 5-game losing streak or a 1-4-1 5-game stretch. You got to be consistent from here on in if you want to make the playoffs. And boy, we still have a lot to talk about, and we will be talking about it in coming days about what happens with Brock Nelson, Kyle Palmieri, and at the trade deadline. All right, time for our Islanders birthday of the day. Let's see if you got this one right. But Sunday was the 50th birthday of former Islanders winger Todd Bertuzzi, the Sudbury, Ontario native, a first-round pick of the Islanders back in 1993. 23rd overall pick, made his NHL debut in 95-96, had 18 goals, spent 2 more seasons with the Islanders before being traded to Vancouver late in the 97-98 season. He's a power forward, 6'3", 229. They usually take a little longer to develop. The Islanders didn't wait, but by 1999-2000, 25 goals, 36 goals in 01-02, 46 goals in 02-03, and 97 points. All of a sudden, Todd Bertuzzi became a really strong player. Later played briefly for the Panthers, the Red Wings, the Ducks, the Flames, and then the Red Wings again. Ended up with 314 career goals, 770 points, and 1,478 penalty minutes in 1,159 NHL games. Had 14 goals, 42 points in 87 playoff games. Obviously, none of those with the Islanders. One of his better games as an Islander, April 10th. 1996 at the old Igloo in Pittsburgh. Islanders visiting the Penguins. We have Tommy Soderstrom in goal for the Islanders in their fisherman jerseys. Ken Reggett in between the pipes for Pittsburgh. And with the Islanders up 2-0, our Islanders birthday of the day, Todd Bertuzzi pots his 16th goal of the year. Pat Conacher and Chris Taylor with the assist. That made it 3-0. Then, after the second period with the Islanders up 3-1, we go to the third, and Bertuzzi sets up Brian McCabe with a goal. Kenny Janssen with the other assist. That made it 4-1 Islanders. And Bertuzzi then closed out the scoring with his 17th. Marty McGinnis and Nicholas Anderson, the helpers. Islanders down the Penguins by a score of 6-2, 23 saves for Soderstrom. But for our Islanders' birthday of the day, Todd Bertuzzi, 2 goals, an assist, a +3. He scored the game winner, and he scored 2 goals on 3 shots on goal as the Islanders came away with an upset win over the Penguins. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On Islanders your first listen every day. Every dayers, we are back tomorrow. We will have a full preview of the game against the Vegas Golden Knights, last home game before the Four Nations break. And we will also have some injury updates, hopefully, on Scott Mayfield and Matt Barzal. If you have a question, a comment, maybe a topic you'd like us to discuss on a future episode, feel free to email us at lockedonislanders@gmail.com. If you leave your first name and where you're from, we're happy to mention you on the show when we discuss whatever's on your mind. You can also follow the show on X at Locked On Isles, and you can follow me, Gil Martin, on X at Ice Wars, NYR, VSNYI. We'll keep you up to date on all things Islanders all year long, and I am live tweeting during nearly every Islanders home and road game, so join me for some instant insight and analysis. Have a great day, everybody. Stay safe, and of course, let's go Islanders.